Welcome to Tone Talks. Welcome to Tone Talks. Welcome to Tone Talks. How's everybody doing today? This is Antonio Moore coming to you from Tone Talks. I'm going to have a discussion about Elizabeth Holmes and this Theranos situation that we see. She was convicted of felonies. I don't think she's going to get a very long sentence. But let's talk about it together and get right into why that's the case and how America built it. So basically, she can do this and get away with it. People can believe what they want. Let's talk about it. So I got people all across the country. Shout out Poker Princess. Shout out to you. Oh, what's up with you? How you doing? Thank you for coming in here. I know you be with Zoe. Oh man, Peaches ain't here. We got Bonita, we got Amanda. Shout out to everybody. We gonna talk about Elizabeth Holmes. Ironwork, how you don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is? You gotta follow the news, bro. You can't be out here in life and not be following the basic news. So, Theranos was supposedly this cutting edge company. So long ago, I remember the news stories. I remember when this came out. I read this when it came out. I remember reading this, and it was talking about how her teachers thought she was a genius and how, she grew up with all this privilege and how she was going to change the world, and thinking the company didn't make no sense. But here we are, and the company didn't make no sense. So many years ago, they casted her as the white female Zuckerberg, right? She was going to be the next. But what we find is that white oppression, white patriarchy is held in family, not in a gender, right? So we're here on Tone Talks going to have a discussion not only about Theranos, not only giving some background on what happened and what went down, but also how they didn't build no prisons for women, or negligible amounts compared to the men. We're in a very equal society. I mean, in terms of opportunity, in terms of jobs, we're in a very equal society in terms of just natural movement, and criminality is even relatively, I'm not saying men don't do more crimes, but it isn't anywhere on pace with how they built the jails. They basically built the jails as if women weren't going to commit crimes. And the consequence happens not only in the convictions, but also the sentencing, because what you find is that they just don't have a jail for her. They're going to put her up in there. She'll be doing the electric slide. I'll show you. I don't know how we did this. Shout out Ironwork. I see you done figured it out. So let's go. We're going to have this discussion. We got people falling in all across this country. North Carolina in here. Thank you so much for joining us. Please support this channel. Use Patreon. Use Cash App. Subscribe, press the bell, share this video. A lot of people want to talk about a lot of nonsense, but let's talk about this real sense, right? And the reason we're talking about this is the impact and the context of a world where young black boys go to jail for decades for small amounts of nonviolent drug offenses, while a woman like this is basically a threat to society. She's a social monster, but she likely won't face any kind of time. I just say likely. So let's talk about it. Elizabeth Holmes is this woman. She was found guilty, okay? 4 of the 11 charges. We're going to read on her a little bit. Elizabeth Holmes, the former CEO and founder of the failed blood testing startup Theranos, was found guilty on 4 charges of defrauding investors, capping off the stunning downfall of a former tech icon. She was not found guilty on 3 additional charges concerning defrauding patients. Now, they only called 3 patients. I don't know why they only called 3, but they called 3. And 1 charge of conspiracy to defraud patients. The jury returned no verdict on 3 charges, 3 of the charges concerning defrauding investors, and Judge Edward Davila, who is presiding over the case, is expected to declare a mistrial on those charges. The charges Elizabeth was found guilty of include 1 count of conspiracy to defraud investors, as well as 3 wire fraud counts tied to specific investors. I want everybody to understand what this business was. This business was supposed to revolutionize what they can get from your blood. They're supposed to have been able to peck your finger and tell all kind of things that you need and all kind of nonsense. It was so revolutionary that you were supposed to go to CVS, get a peck on your finger, and find out your diabetes medicine, I believe. But she was basically not able to deliver that and just giving people wrong information on their medical treatments. But somehow the patients aren't involved in when it comes to her. Let's keep going. The charges Holmes was found guilty of include one count of conspiracy to defraud investors, as well as 3 wire fraud counts tied to specific investors. Holmes faces up to 20 years in prison, as well as a fine of $250,000 plus tuition restitution for each count. Let's say $250,000. Evans, her mother and father, she was Holmes departed the courthouse hand in hand with her partner, Billy Evans, her mother and her father. She was met with a sea of cameras and reporters, but not comment in response to questions. How long are they gonna take to do a Lifetime movie? She gonna sell her life rights for about $10 million. So her restitution, her fine is $250,000. But because she a white woman in an America where white women have pretty much the same wealth as white men, no matter what they talk about with earnings. Let's look at that wealth. 130 trillion in white homes. She gonna sell her life rights for $10 million a lifetime. Can I talk about it? She gonna walk away with a golden egg from this? She done did all this. Notably, the jury of 8 men and 4 women determined that Holmes was guilty on counts pertaining to investors, but none of the counts that pertain to defrauding patients. I wonder if they would have been as lenient if this was a black man, let alone a black woman. They'd have found them patients. The government called just 3 patient witnesses to the stand, 2 of whom were individually tied to wire fraud counts. So the government decided not to really pursue this harshly. Would they have called 3 people on a black man? They'd have called 179 people. Can we talk about it? They'd have got all their phone numbers. The jury deliberated over 50 hours before returning a verdict on 8 of the 11 charges. Earlier Monday, the jury returned a note indicating that they could not reach a unanimous verdict on 3 of the counts. In response, Judge Davila issued what is known as an Allen charge, instructing them to continue deliberating, try to reach a verdict. However, hours later, the jury returned another note that indicated it remained unable to reach a verdict on those counts. So I guess he missed trial on those. So she got 4 charges, and they all involving investors. What y'all think she gonna get? Can we talk? We done wasted all this energy. She done did all this fraud, and she gonna walk up out of there with 12 months. They keep telling us that she got up to 20 years. I want to see the kind of sentence they give her. But we gonna talk about it. I said my tweet on this was, watch her get 18 months at a low-level prison and get it cut to 1 year good time work time. With that good time work time, because they ain't got enough prisons, so they be giving women excessive good time work time, especially these let's get them out of here, get them on parole, get her out of there, get her back home where she can sell these life rights. I said there needs to be equality. So what I say is, if you're gonna have the argument about equality when it comes to pay, which is a good argument, I definitely believe in it. Equality with white men, we all need it. We need equality with black men when it comes to prisons. By the time you get to the end of this show, we'll have discussions. Those people that have followed my channel already know where we're going with this. Black men are basically the place that they built. They built prisons for black men, and then secondarily Latino men, and then some white men. They didn't build them for white women. They don't have them. They have very nominal. They don't have them for women. So when you watch them talk about women in prison, they always talk in percentages. They don't talk in raw numbers because they don't want to give you the raw numbers, because then you'll understand they ain't really incarcerating women, even though women are doing crime just like men to survive, but then you don't get no sentence. Can we talk about it? Y'all remember this article? If you haven't, go read it. It was her teacher thought she was a once in a generation, and she was the one that was his best student ever. I remember reading this back years ago, being like, white privilege, and this don't make no sense. Theranos jury draws a line between hype and lies. I got this article coming out of Reuters. Defunct blood testing startup Theranos now a cautionary legal tale A federal U.S. jury on Monday convicted founder Elizabeth Holmes of defrauding investors. If that verdict stands, the possibility of years in prison sends a strong message that even in Silicon Valley, there's a limit to how flagrantly you can fake it until you make it. The jury finding marks a rare instance of accountability for a technology executive. Holmes had been hailed as a female version of Apple founder Steve Jobs, as she touted a machine that could perform over 240 clinical tests using a single finger prick of blood. I want you to understand, she gave people, actual patients, the wrong diagnosis. They didn't bring them patients in. They brought 3 of them. They didn't want her to go to jail. If they wanted her to go to jail, they would have went after her the way they would have went after a drug kingpin or somebody else who was a monster to society. The fact that people went in and got the wrong treatment from this woman because she was defrauding people is awful. But we'll see with that sentence where they go. Please call in 310-388-3499, 310-388-3499. I want to hear from you. I want to hear this discussion. What y'all feeling about this before I continue on with this message? I need to know because this is crazy when I see it. Oh, that's what happened. Poker put it right. She said this woman turned an easy bake oven into a Krispy Kreme French fries. No, she just got to sell it to CVS, but it still was an easy bake oven. It still was an easy bake oven. Oh man, here we go with the concept, with all the nonsense. So we out here and we having this discussion. We're trying to see if everybody understands. Theranos was valued at up to $10 billion in 2015, and the code of personality around her duly formed. Her charisma, however, failed to sway jurors. During the 4-month trial, she took the witness stand to argue that she had always believed the technology worked and blamed the former Theranos executive whom she accused of emotional abuse. Investors could gain some solace from the verdict. Witnesses included a money manager for the family office of former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, will put $100 million into the startup. The 4-count conviction included conspiracy to commit wire fraud against Theranos investors. Holmes had indicated the company was expected to generate $1 billion in revenue in 2015, and she knew the accurate figure was a few $100,000. So she was out here hustling. Oh, man. So, look, we're going to have this discussion now that we laid the framework, but we're going to look at who this woman was. This is women's rights. There's no dream you can't achieve. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Hashtag I look like an engineer. And what she's talking about is being a woman. So we want equality. And I definitely agree. When she was 7, Holmes tried to invent her own time machine, filling up an entire notebook with detailed engineering drawings. She was a genius. But she dang sure didn't know how to prick a finger with blood and give you all these clinical prescriptions and diagnosis, but she was going to sell it to you anyway. At the age of 9, Holmes told relatives she wanted to be a billionaire when she grew up. Her relatives described her as saying it with the utmost seriousness and determination. So she wanted to be a billionaire just for the fact of being a billionaire. She wanted to lord over people. 310-388-3499. I want to hear from you on this Theranos. Inspired by her great-great-grandfather, let's say that again because most of our great-great-grandfathers were enslaved. Christian Holmes, a surgeon, that's her great-great-grandfather. Holmes decided she wanted to go into medicine, but she discovered early on that she was terrified of needles. Later, she said this influenced her to start Theranos. Okay. Somebody says she sounds like a dreamer. Sound like a scammer to me. I ain't giving her even that title. We done gave that title away too many times already. Can we talk about it? But we know the history, and we're going to keep this brief and succinct because this is more about where the sentencing will go as a result of the charges, because the charges that we were looking at was the patient charges. She wasn't found guilty of those. Those are the ones that I believe that would have led to the harsher sentencing, possibly. Even then, they didn't build the prisons. But when you just defrauded the investors, you might get a few months. Do y'all remember Lori Loughlin? The whole arc of it? Let's simplify it. Lori Loughlin, the cheating scandal. We're talking about wire fraud, wires. We're talking about across state lines. We're talking about multiple decades of prison sentence. But she didn't face no multiple decades. Lori Loughlin hit with new charges in college admission scandal. November 19, they were talking about Loughlin and her spouse are facing around 50 years in prison. Loughlin and her spouse are facing around 50 years in prison. Do y'all remember what she got sentenced to? Lori Loughlin pled guilty in college admission scandal to 2 months in prison. 2 months. That's what she got sentenced to. She pled out and got a sentence of 2 months. They should have rejected that. No, this is not right. But they ain't got no prisons for you anyway, and it ain't nothing but like wire fraud. But if it was a black man, or let alone even a black woman, but particularly if it was a black man, we'll find that decade because they got the space for you. We built the prison already. Part of what we see when we look at this thing is we have to be honest about incarceration numbers. I think a lot of people have no idea about what I'm talking about, but I'll make it clear so it's not just speculative. Because we've been running around here on emotions, talking about people getting pregnant in prison, or people getting sick in prison, or something else, or menstrual cycles, which are important, but we don't talk numbers. Because when we talk numbers, we'll start dealing with the reality of they only got like 140,000 women in prison in America. Wait. U.S. and territories incarcerated population, adult and juvenile inmates. Now, this is older data, but it's a chart that actually laid it out. Total 2.5 million. Federal and state prisons 1.5 million. Local jails 785,000. Juvenile facilities 86,000. But these are almost all men. And not only are they almost all men in an equal society as far as us moving around, really criminality even, but also it's driven by black men. Little bit of black men that come from slaves and Jim Crow largely produce all the prisoners. And don't nobody care. I did a chart some years ago on the griot to kind of frame it back in, actually now it's about like 6 years ago, but I just kind of want to pull it up because I need everybody to kind of understand so we got a discussion of why she won't face a lot of time. Because they planned when she was born for her not to do that, because they didn't build the prison when she was born for her. They built it for your son. So when you look at incarceration rates, one of the highest rates that we've ever seen in modern societies is South Africa during apartheid. That was 800 per 100,000. 800 per 100,000. Doesn't break a percent. That's why they use per 100,000. 800 per 100,000. Excuse me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's about 0.8. 0.8. That is the highest. A normal rate is like 150, 120, even down to like 75 per 100,000. White women are at 129 in America per 100,000. They don't go to prison. They don't go to jail. They commit crimes. They often even get convicted. They just don't send them to jail. Their mothers, their daughters, they got sob stories. Even her, she got to push back her whole case because she got pregnant, I think in May or something like that. Black women are at 330 per 100,000. Now, the game that is played, and I was at Karen Bass's office, and she did this. Oh, I'm going to focus on women prisons. You know why? Because if you have, say you have like a prison with like 20,000 women in it, or even 8,000, it'd be small like that. If you release 3,000, you can say, I cut prison by 50%. You can parade around the percentage instead of the raw number, while leaving in maybe 100,000 black men in the prison right next to it. Because if you release only 3,000 black men, that ain't no percentage against 100,000. So the game and the con has been basically to manipulate around percentages rather than raw number, while sending black men to prison for the same crimes as everybody else for decades-long sentences, decades longer. But when we look at it again, white men break nearly 1,000 per 100,000. Overall, black men are at like 500 5,000 per 100,000, but that's counting when you say black males. You're counting young people that are underage, under 18, and you're counting old men. When you look at working age black men, that's 20 to 39. It's nearly 9,000 per 100,000, or it was. Let me say. So 9,000 per 100,000. Highest rate ever, 800 per 100,000 in South Africa during apartheid for black males. Black women are at 300 per 100,000, and white women are 100 per 100,000. But we talking about equality in pay. And we want to look at Theranos and not understand how she gonna get sentenced. Can we go back to it? Let's go back a second. Make sure we understand. Facing 50 years, got 2 months. They never would have gave a black man that deal because they got a prison space for him. They got it for him, and he done did this, and he a menace to society. The number of women incarcerated in the state and federal prisons in the United States has increased significantly since 1980. As of 2019, there were 107,000 women in state and federal prison in 2019. Let's go back. But there's, this is excuse the numbers a little bit, but like generally speaking, look at in the range. So out of the 1.5, only 100,000 are women. Out of the 1.5, only 100,000 are women. Huh. They ain't got the prison for her. I did an article back some years ago on Huffington Post. The black male incarceration problem is real and catastrophic. In it, I said, the census estimates that approximately 18.5 million people in the U.S. population are black males of all ages. The Bureau of Justice Statistics National Prisoner Statistics Program reports that in the same year, 526,000 were in state and federal prison. Huh. Let's talk about it. Everybody act like they on my level with this. You're not on my level. Go find some other YouTube to watch that if you ain't ready to talk truth and numbers. Don't use my stuff on somebody else's channel. Let's break this down. So 526,000 just black males. 18 million black men produce 526,000 in state and federal prison. Let's go back. 200 million women overall produce 100,000 prisoners in state and federal prison. The whole prison system is for black men and men in general. They never intended for women to go to jail. So unless you stabbing somebody in the face or the head or the neck, then they ain't going to, nobody wants to report that. We ain't going to talk about that. When we talk about equality and all this, we're not going to talk about equality and incarceration for justice. Can we talk about it? Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Hey, son. This is Tiffany. How are you?
How are you doing today? Man,
I am doing good. I am so happy that you're talking about this because when I listen to the podcast that they have, so I've been following the case as it's been going on. And the wealth part really, really got to me. Her donors, the people that, pay for the company, because she started off pretty well. And one of the things that I found very, very fascinating when I was listening to that podcast is she met with a billionaire. And he was telling them about Theranos and what he plans to do and how this will revolutionize the medical field. And she gave her presentation. And this billionaire went home. He had a family meeting with at least 10 to 12 family members. And he told them about Theranos as well. And the next day, he received from each family member $3 to $5 million apiece.
Yeah, with no product. She just her mouthpiece, and then she's supposed to be successful because she's a white woman and a genius.
Just her mouthpiece alone. The whole and when I heard that, my mouth dropped, and I was like, "This is what Tone is talking about," because I can't sit my whole family down and tell them about a deal that I don't even know anything about. I don't even have the capacity to understand any of this medical technology. Terminology.
Neither did they. That's why they lost their money, but they ain't
right.
They don't
right.
Care.
They didn't have any information, but yet they had the money to throw away
as a potential
to this lady as a potential because he never delivered on it, and then there were, as the years went on, it was just lie after lie with no product, but it's so fascinating to me.
Can I also point to something else again? Another element
Yeah,
that gets lost, and you're being a black woman. I'm not at all trying to attack black women, nor women at large. I'm just trying to point to facts. Like everybody says equality, and I believe in equality, but nobody talks about equality in incarceration. And like nobody, right. You can Google all you want to, you're not gonna find it. It's a bunch of articles about how women get treated bad in prison, and they go to individual. And then when they talk about women release, it's percentages. And the reason they do that is because ain't no women in prison really. And I think it's like 20,000 black women incarcerated, whereas there's like 600,000 black men all across America. Now, my thing is, we come back to this, and I asked if you even knew this. In federal and state prison in 19, there were 107,000 women incarcerated. There's 400 million Americans. 200 million would be women. 200 million people produce about 100,000 people to go to jail. But 18 million black males that come out of slavery produce 500,000 from in the same system. How do you see it as a black woman that they built all the prisons just for men? Because I rarely get to ask this of a black woman, because oftentimes we just bungle it all together. They're just, they're targeting black people. But here, they didn't build the prison. They just decided when you were born and I was born that prison's okay for me and not okay for you. America decided that. I believe partially the reason America decided that is because we respect and revere black motherhood in a way we don't respect and revere black fatherhood. In fact, we respect motherhood in general more than fatherhood. But I also think it's because black men, they're like, we have a hard time seeing them as victims. And I guess I'll just leave the floor to you to say if you knew these numbers or what you think about them, and you can close out.
Well, I worked for Cook County Department of Corrections. I was a social worker in Division 8 RTU, so I definitely know what you're talking about. And it was one of those jobs that I had to definitely leave because they weren't allowing me to help these black men. I had black men and black women actually because of where I was located. Mm-hmm. But it was heartbreaking that I couldn't even assist them in some way of transitioning out of prison or helping them with anything. My job was to basically pacify the needs that they have in other departments in Cook County Department of Corrections and CCDOC. So I completely understand what you're saying, and it is a gap. Even if you look at the programs that are allowed to men versus women, my women got treated like queens. And I'm not saying that, I'm exaggerating a little bit.
I'm talking about just building prisons. We're in a society that's equal. I'm not talking about a 10% variation. They literally build all the prisons for men, put all the black men in there, and then they just let people like this Theranos lady run wild. I'll let you finish your point because I just wanted to make it visual.
Oh no, I mean, and you are completely correct. Before I left, the men were suing Cook County so that they could have religious services. Like they were so restricted, they couldn't even have a minister come in and have church with them. But the ladies, on the other hand, they had yoga in the morning. They had different religious nuns and different things coming out there. They had children visits in one part of the county. So you are completely correct. And the thing that gets me is they know that Theranos is a mastermind in some way. She got pregnant on purpose. And she threw her little boyfriend under the bus, even though he didn't even have the mastermind or intelligence to do the amount of crap that she did. And so it just blew me that she only got charged 3 things and they deadlocked on all that other stuff.
Call
it,
it.
it, it, it's just quite fascinating to me that they didn't see that.
Since you called in,
So that's
I consider you a bit of an expert. I want you to stay on with me a little longer than normal, and I want to go through some more things. That's really interesting, even because like when you're in it, you probably look at it one to one. I mean, one person comes in front of you, another person comes in front of you. So like, yeah, you did deal with black men and black women, and they don't. There's no ratio to it. But when you back out and see the vision of the mastermind systematic way that they incarcerated black males, unlike any other group, it really begs the question: like, what do they expect? What do you expect your son or your brother to be in this society if you didn't say nothing about this? Not you individually. I'm talking about socially, we as black folks, because what I showed in this article, Black Male Incarceration, is to give a lens for it. I wanted to give some kind of context. Viewing the data, India is a country of 1 billion people. The country in total has 380,000 prisoners. In fact, there are more African American men incarcerated than the total prison populations in India, Argentina, Canada, Lebanon, Japan, Germany, Finland, Israel, and England combined. There were, at the time that I did this, there were 750,000 black men behind bars. Again, we're talking about 100,000, 130,000 women incarcerated of all races. But where you really see it is in the number of prisons. They literally should have built. I'm not saying it even has to be 50-50. It should be like 60-40 maybe, but it isn't 60-40. It's like 90-10, if not 95-5. The number, and a lot of the 5% of prisons for women are low level. So they don't have a place to put somebody who does this kind of crime, isn't necessarily violent, and a woman that isn't violent, and then give her the proper sentence. So she ends up just, you never even built a prison for me to actually do this kind of crime, meaning the Theranos young woman. So what ends up happening is you get sentences like this, where Lori Loughlin, do you remember her? She was supposed to face 50 years. They let her plea out to 2 months. They would never let a black man plea out to no 2 months on a 50-year sentence. They didn't want to deal with her. Plus, I don't know if you dealt with this in Cook County. Maybe you can speak to this. Maybe you can speak to this in some other aspect. But I know here in LA, one of the worst kinds of prisoners that people want to deal. Well, one, they don't want to deal with pregnant prisoners, and then two, they don't, because of the paperwork, as I understand it, and also more importantly, they don't want to deal with celebrities, because then you got to house them separately and all of the work. But I don't know. Figure it out. Do you have any experience with either of those two?
Cermak is located right next to 8RTU in Cook County. So Cermak is where we would keep our celebrity prisoners at. And it is very difficult because Cermak is small. There's not a lot of staff, and it's considered the hospital of Cook County. So if you're sick, severely sick, I guess you want to call it, you would go there before you would be transferred to the hospital. So, I mean, it is very difficult because it requires one-on-one, so you have to have an officer there at one time, and nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to, you're not going to fund that very, very long, and so the idea is to hurry up and get them out of there as quickly as possible, because they can't have that much status.
Wait, slow that down. You said hurry up and get them out of there as quick as possible. What do you mean by that? What does that mean by get who?
Well, because it's too much manpower.
Come on.
It's going to take too much manpower to have someone there 24 hours because they have to be separated. They can't even be in Gen Pop. They have to be alone. Number one, they're going to be alone for suicide watch for a minimum amount of time. And then once they move from the suicide watch, they're going to be in protective custody. Protective custody is basically one-on-one watch. You can't have them out in general population. So it takes a lot of work in order for you to fund that. That's extra. That's extra money that the state has to spend just to have that inmate in there.
And what's a trip about this is what'll end up happening is they push on us. She's facing 20 years, right? They push this narrative on us like we saw with Lori Loughlin. 50 years. but then they slick in the 2 months. And then or even what the other thing you see sometimes is they'll sentence them to 5. But like where 5 is actually like 3.5 for a man, a black man in particular, maybe even 4. 5 might become 2 or even 1 for a woman because they just don't have the jail. If it's a woman like this, it might become like 1 or less than 1. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's going to be less than 1 too because of COVID and her pregnancy.
Come on.
So there's a threat of her pregnancy going right now. And not only that, the idea of a white woman giving birth in prison that hasn't committed a violent crime will most definitely push her to being out, by the time she's, ready to give birth. I doubt that she'll be in there during that time because it's just going to take too much effort. Even to have a pregnant woman in your jail is quite a bit. You're talking about officers having to give her extra meals every day. You got to have somebody deliver that to her.
Come on.
My pregnant inmates, literally, they have to have more than 1 meal than the other prisoners, So you have to bring that to them. They have to have certain accommodations. So if you do that on top of COVID, he's not going.
And look at this. I brought this up, and this doesn't even give true context because one thing they do, I just don't understand how there's not a black male body of work around incarceration equality. There's this big body of work around like lifting up women in jail. I don't think anybody should be mistreated, but it's not a lot of women in jail. There's a much more larger argument to be had. How are these people not getting the proper sentences? Well, part of it is you didn't build the prisons and don't nobody know. Even people that work in prisons. There's 122 federal prisons throughout the U.S., but there's only 29 of them that house women. Now, even within that 29, a bulk of those 29 are low-level offender prisons, meaning they'll have dance class and books, unlike the male prison. So they
yoga,
all kind of things. Now, in no way am I arguing I want more people to go to prison. But in a society that has decided to incarcerate the way it has, this Theranos woman should be in prison for decades. For decades.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna read this. I'm gonna read this to you in the audience. There are 122 federal prisons throughout the U.S. housing more than 151,000 inmates. June 19. Of the nearly 152,000 federal offenders, women consistently account for approximately 7% of the federal inmate population. 50% of the population. I don't want to hear that you're not doing 50% of the crime because I would argue anywhere from 40 to 50%. While nationwide, women are growing correctional population, women in the Bureau have comprised a steady portion of the overall population. In the Bureau, women are housed among 29 facilities, and even some of those 29 are mixed. So true, just all women facilities, very small, and then a lot of them are low level. So I'm making the argument that part of the reason that she won't see time is they just didn't plan for her to see time from the day she was born. Women's prisons in the U.S., then when you get to the local level, they don't even keep numbers because they don't want nobody to find out. Due to the decentralized nature of our criminal justice system, there's no existing easy to find complete list of active women in prisons in the U.S. Somebody did this article. The list I compiled below is based on the information of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. That's the only place you can get it. But state, local is kind of hard. And so what you find is there's 1,800 state prisons, but I would bet like 200, if not 100, less than that, are for women. And a lot of them are like what we just saw, low dance class, low level. What I'm making the argument of today, and I appreciate you calling in, because sometimes it's really good to get what I call an expert, and you definitely are an expert to speak to this. And I just want you to spend your last seconds just coming back to Elizabeth Holmes and contextualizing like how you see this case and like, whatever else you want to say.
Thank you so much, Tone. It was good talking to you once again. One of the things that I did find very, very interesting is the test that, because of Theranos, the tests that were ran, a lot of those people got misdiagnosed. We're talking like not little stuff,
no,
but really, really, really bad diseases. We're talking cancer.
And they only brought three patients up. They only brought 3 patients up. They didn't bring them up in the line and make sure she got that patient side. I think that's where the big sentence would have been, big relatively, but like we talk about Jack, basically similar to Lori Loughlin now, just like investment fraud. But go ahead and finish your point. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
Oh no, and what was so crazy is that one of them was a lady who had been trying to get pregnant, and her test had revealed that she had a miscarriage. And I mean, she was distraught because she was, awaiting to be pregnant. And, this took her through a lot. She was literally depressed for months. And that wasn't able to be, brought up during the case either. And it's just, the lies that she continued to tell. And also bullying people to the point where, one of the employees committed suicide.
Employees of her company?
So it's just, yeah, there was one employee that they had early on that, was bullied by her, and he ended up committing suicide. And that was brought up in the podcast as well. I mean, she is an evil mastermind. Like she was destructively evil. And unfortunately, that pregnancy, and then they strategically was okay with putting it during COVID. It really sealed the deal for her. And it's disappointing because we're sitting here ragging about people on PPP loans, when we're deserved the money. And here we have this lady who really screwed over everybody. And yet, she probably will get a month. And so it's disappointing.
Yeah.
But it also shows us quite a few things from looking at this case. And it's sad that a lot of people weren't paying attention to it. So
thank you so much for calling.
Thank you so much for letting me call in.
Man, that was a powerful call. A lot of support for you in the chat. What I'm going to come back to is this Associated Press article. Holmes expressed no visible emotion as the verdicts were read. I wouldn't either if I know I ain't going to go to jail that long. They done told her they ain't got no jail for you, no way. Oh, they didn't convict you on the patient ones, on the patient counts. We going to sentencing just on the financial crimes part. You gonna do 6 months. We gonna get you up out of there in 3. She was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy and found not guilty of 4 other felony charges. The former entrepreneur could now face up to 20 years in prison. We've seen up to before. We've seen it before, and it don't look like this. Up to, let's talk about it, looks like this. Up to 50 years. We're going to let you plead out for 2 months. Oh, where do you do that? The rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes, the Theranos founder who is now on trial for fraud. My point for doing this show was to talk about the Theranos case, but to contextualize it against a reality of basically America decided that this woman wasn't going to be a criminal from the day she was born. This is Tone Talks. Please go to tonetalks.org to subscribe or donate. Share this video. Let's keep the discussion going because we're having the discussion that nobody else in America is having.